Greetings and welcome to Trinity Radio. I'm Johnathan Pritchett, and along with me, as usual, is Braxton Hunter. And today we have a special guest, Dr. Tim Stratton. How you doing, Tim?
Doing good, guys. Thanks for having me on again.
I love it, Tim, when you're on, because people tell me, well, I couldn't tell who was who. And since you're much more fit and muscular than I am, I'm like, great. That's great. That's a great compliment. But
Tim is what Braxton would be if he ever paid attention to anything I tell him. That's
right.
That's true. That's true.
I'm just listening to Pritchett all the time. Pritchett's always telling me to work out every day. I'm like, all right, boss, I'll do it. And so,
yeah. And Tim tells me to go shoot guns all the time, and amen. Right. Yes, sir.
All right, so let me say something. So I reached out to Tim this morning to ask if he would like to come on and talk about this, because he's kind of a Craig head, like the three of us are. You know, we really grew up, you know, or I shouldn't say grew up, but early on in our apologetics interest, Craig was the man, and so we all three kind of have, I think, a fair awareness of what Craig is talking about from his perspective when he talks about time and omniscience. So I asked him to come on here, but for you listening, if you've never been to Trinity Radio before, welcome. We'd love for you to subscribe if you like the kind of content you see here today. But I just want us to jump in pretty quick and start talking about the video. And so we'll play the video here in just a moment, because you may not be here because you enjoy our banter, and there will be some of that banter as we go, especially the further we go. But I want to make sure you get something early on. So, Johnathan, why don't you go ahead and get the video ready? And if there's anything else you have to say, now's the time.
I do. By the way, all three of us are professors at Trinity College of the Bible and Theological Seminary. And if you are interested in learning from one of the three of us, or even better, Leighton Flowers or Chris Featherstone or Dr. Jim Chatham,
you're here.
Or a number of professors, you can go to trinitysem.edu and fill out an evaluation form, and our admissions department will get in touch with you. And then with that, we're going to get right into the video.
One might think that if God is omniscient, then he can't learn anything new, because to be omniscient is to know all truth. It's to know all the facts there are. But in fact, an omniscient being can learn things that are new if he is in time. If God is in time, then at any particular moment of time, he knows all the truths that there are at that moment. But if truth changes over time, then God's knowledge will change over time as well. So to illustrate, say at a certain moment, God knows that Bill Craig is now eating lunch. But in a few moments, he will no longer know that because Bill Craig is not eating lunch at that moment. He will now know Bill Craig is resuming his study, and he'll come to know, instead of Bill Craig is now eating lunch, he will say Bill Craig was then eating lunch. So if God is in time, even though he knows all the truths that there are at any moment of time, because truths change over time, God will in fact learn new truths, new facts as time elapses.
Okay, now before we say anything else, if it's all right with you two guys, and you can tell me if it's not, I don't want to steal your thunder, but I'd kind of like to try and explain what I think Craig is saying in the simplest way that I possibly can, right off the top of my head, and then we can begin to talk. Is that okay with you guys? So here's what I think Craig, what I think I know Craig is saying. So Craig has this view that God is timeless, sans creation. That is, without creation, God is timeless. You don't want to say before creation, because then you're making the existence sans creation a temporal existence, a time-based existence. So you just want to say sans creation, sans the universe, God is timeless. Yeah. But from the moment, on Craig's view, from the moment that God created, he cannot help but be aware that for the humans that he created, it is, 12:07 on a Friday, whatever the date is. He can't help but be aware once he creates
in the central time zone.
Yeah, in different time zones. Yeah. And for his creatures. Okay. So he's so in that sense, he's in time. Now, it's kind of hard to grapple with if you're new to hearing it, because to say that God is in time, you almost think you're saying he's in the universe. It's not so much that as it is he exists, sans the universe, but he's aware of the passing of time. Now, to put this as simply as I can, there are two ways that you can know something. There is propositional knowledge and there's experiential knowledge. Propositional knowledge is your awareness of the truth value of propositions. So if I say Tim Stratton is a man with long hair, okay, I've made a propositional statement that is false. The truth value of that is false. It's not true that Tim, if I say Tim is bald and very attractive, well, that's a subjective claim, but I think it's objectively true that Tim is attractive. So, so I think so. So now we're talking about. So if I say 10 years from now on a Thursday on this date at this time, X is going to happen. Well, if we think that has a truth value, and not all Christians do, open theists don't think it does, but if we think that has a truth value, that it is either true or false, God knows whether it's true or false. And so God really doesn't ever learn anything in terms of learning new information or new propositions. But on the experiential side of things, once God is experiencing the passing of time, he has the experience of knowing now it's 1209. Before it was 1207. So right now I know God could say, I know that it's 1209, but at 1208, he could not say, I know it is 1209. That's something he didn't know, that it's now 1209, because it's not now 1209. Okay. This is kind of like, to help tease this out, atheists will come up with an argument for called, well, some of the arguments against God's existence are called incoherency arguments. They're arguments that something about God is incoherent. And so when they say, so that they come up with like the omniscience paradox and the omnipotence paradox you're familiar with. Can God make a rock so big that he can't lift it? Well, the omniscience paradox isn't there some things that God doesn't know? And doesn't that mean he's not omniscient? So for example, God does not, I know I'm Braxton Hunter. I know that I'm Braxton Hunter. Does God know I'm Braxton Hunter? Oh, he knows that me sitting on your camera, on your screen, am Braxton Hunter. But does God know about himself, I am Braxton Hunter? Well, no. Well, doesn't that seem like I have a type of knowledge that God doesn't have? I am Braxton Hunter. God doesn't know that. Well, God knows that that guy over there is Braxton Hunter talking into the camera, but he doesn't know about himself, I'm Braxton Hunter. But none of us care about that, because that's not what we've classically meant when we say that God is omniscient. We mean that he knows the truth value of all propositions. And so I think what Craig is doing here is playing, and I do think there's a bit of play here. He's playing in that area where he can kind of lean on God's experiential knowledge and say, yeah, in a way God learns, but he doesn't learn any new information. Now that's what I think is going on. What do you guys say?
Tim?
Yeah, well, I think your summary there was pretty good, Braxton. I actually, I've actually published on this topic in my book. This is the first edition, Human Freedom, Divine Knowledge, and Mere Molinism. I just finished the second edition, by the way, and so that should be out soon. And in the second edition, this particular part of the book is expanded. So here, this part is called Molinism and the Argument from Time. And so I talk quite a bit. I spent a lot of time talking about time. And like I said, in the second edition, forthcoming very soon, it's expanded and we go even deeper. And I actually ran it by Ryan Mullins, who's another expert who really, I see Dr. William Lane Craig and Dr. Ryan Mullins. If you're going to get into serious time discussions, you got to spend time learning from those two guys. Now, I have had Dr. Craig, but the very first class I ever had at Biola University was a whole seminar on God and time back in 2012, I think. It wasn't my first class, sorry, but one of the first classes. And so I had to read his books that he's published on it. So I think I have a pretty good understanding of his view. I don't want to speak for Dr. Craig, so I might make some mistakes here. And if he sees it, he can correct me. But Braxton, when you said that God is timeless sans creation, I think Dr. Craig came up with that. And I think it really describes nicely what's going on there. And then I say, and I would agree with Dr. Craig, that once God creates, he is eternally in time. Now, some people say, you mean he's trapped in time? Yeah, there's nothing he can do to go back to a timeless state. And I'll say, well, and to show this, I say, well, does an omnipotent God have the power to annihilate or just erase from creation everything he's ever created? So it's just triune God existing alone without anything else. Does an omnipotent God have the power to erase all of creation?
As if it never happened, right?
Well,
not just eliminate
it.
it.
Just wait. You're getting ahead of me here. Okay. So I'll say, does God have the power to erase everything from creation? The answer is yes. Then I say, does God have the power to create again for the first time? And the answer is clearly no. That's something logically impossible. So if God created again, it would always be true, a fact of the matter, a fact, or a proposition that corresponds to ultimate reality, that God did create, then he erased, and then he created again. So there is a dynamic sense of time, even if it's not the kind of time that we experience in the central time zone. There is a dynamic sense of time where some kind of moments are passing, and once God creates time, or at least dynamic time, God could never enter a truly timeless state again. I think Dr. Craig has once said, once the temporal cat is out of the bag, it's impossible to get him back in, or something like that.
Well, he said you can't. I've heard him say about, because he's an atheist, and he said, yes, once you created time, you cannot unring that bell.
That's right. That's right.
But that was a choice that God made.
Yes, and I say an omniscient God knew, given Molinism, God knew exactly what he was getting himself into, and knew that it was worth it to eternally be in time. Now, I don't want to speak for Ryan Mullins either. I would encourage you guys to have him on the show to talk about this stuff too. I think that Ryan says that time is an attribute of God, and I can agree with that in a sense. And I talk about this in my book, but it's fair to say that there is an eternal moment, sans creation, but is a qualitatively different kind of moment. It's a static moment in which things aren't happening one after another. But then with God's first act, let's say it's let there be, boom, with creation of the, let's suppose it's creation of the universe. I think good reason to think there is. Then there's something, but no matter what he created, even if he created, the immaterial angelic realms first, there would still be a sense of time, of dynamic time, it seems to me. So once God creates, or simultaneous with creation, a different kind of quality of time is created. If we're going to say that there was a first moment of eternal time, I'm going to say that's a static state where nothing has happened. And then with the first, let's say simultaneous with the first moment of or simultaneous with change, the first moment starts, and then dynamic moments are now occurring, for lack of a better way to describe that. So even if we were going to say that there was always time, we can say that dynamic time, where things change, had a beginning. And I can even give you a quick argument where I say that time actually proves the existence of God. So here's an argument I've offered in the past. It goes, premise one: things change over time. You could say evolution occurs, if things evolve, even if we're not talking about Darwinian evolution just means simply change over time. So premise one: things change over time. Two, a sequence of real temporal changes cannot be infinite in the past. Anybody that studied the Kalam knows that much. Three, therefore, the sequence of changes had a beginning, a first change. Four, a first change cannot arise from a changeless state, unless it is caused by a volitional agent with the power to initiate change. That'll be the controversial premise, but it's defensible. 5, volitional agents are, by definition, personal beings. 6, therefore, a personal agent existed in a changeless state of affairs, or that static state I was talking about. 7, any entity existing in a changeless, uncaused state is eternal and without beginning. 8, therefore, the cause of the first change, and thus the source of the evolving state of affairs we now observe, or this change over time, is an eternal personal agent who existed in a changeless state logically prior to initiating change. Well, who does that sound like? So that's basically, it's highly related to the Kalam cosmological argument, but really just focused on.
Well, Tim, that's how I argue from a volitional agent. That's how I argue as well. And I don't know that I initially heard it anywhere, but it's one of those things that you kind of think of some of these things on your own. I think I kind of thought of Molinism in a sense before I heard of it. And but now I've heard Craig use the argument from a volitional agent. Andrew Loki has used that. Yeah, you would know if it was Loki. Yeah,
well, I would, but also Loki has endorsed my the second edition of my book. So just kind of throw that out there.
Yeah, because from a state of timeless nothingness, Ryan, I want to come back to this idea of a static eternal moment. Okay, we're going to come back to that. I feel like we've kind of already answered the Craig conundrum. So if that's why you came, I'm glad that you're still here. We may just go off on some rabbit trails here at this point. But
I wanted to read this comment real quick. My favorite part about this current kerfluffle is William Lane Craig has held this view the whole time to my knowledge. Yes, I don't recall a time where Dr. Craig has ever thought differently than timeless sans creation, and then in time as an atheist once he brings creation into being. Now, Tim, you and I had a professor at Biola. I don't know if he was there. I think when you were there as well, named Professor Dr. John Bloom. You remember him?
Oh, yeah.
He taught the scientific apologetics course.
Yeah.
And of course, he has a doctorate in physics and a doctorate in archaeology, which was a weird combination.
Right.
But he's one of the coolest guys. And he actually floated the idea in our class because they were asking him questions about this A theory, B theory, all of that. And he was like, no. It's probably God had some sort of meta time as a property of his being. That might be close to what Ryan with Mullen.
That's what we're about to talk about.
Yeah, I've got stuff to say about.
Let me lead into that.
That's not the only, but so there are people that do have that sort of idea.
Let's lead into that, Pritchett, because what I want to say about that is, for those that don't know, first of all, you'll often hear at least about these two understandings of time, that there's an A theory of time and a B theory of time. The A theory of time simply says that, like 1969 or 10 minutes ago or any point in the past, it did exist. It really did exist, but it doesn't exist at all anymore. And the future will exist. It really will. But right now, it doesn't exist at all. A B theory and even I can't say right now, but in no sense does it exist at all. Okay. A B theory of time says, and they use this phrase time block, and they say that it's like the whole thing simultaneously, in some sense of simultaneously, exists. That is, 1969 is really out there. And if you had a way to get to it, like a DeLorean, then you could go there, you could visit there, but it's real. It really is real. So, but the A theorist says it was real. It's not anymore. The B theorist says, no, it's real. And if you could get there, you could go to it. And Craig even talks a little bit about that in time travel in his book, The Only Wise God. So that's a little bit about A theory, B theory. Now, Craig holds to A theory, the idea, and I think the three of us do, the idea that time used to be real, or like 69 used to be real, but it's not real now. 2069 will be real, but it's not real now. That kind of a thing. Okay. Then secondly, we need to talk about something else. Both of those are views on how a metaphysical reality that we call time actually exists. But there is a group, and I can't remember who's in the group, but they're primarily three guys in the philosophy of religion who form what we could refer to as, or what has been referred to as, the Cambridge group, because I think they had these conversations at Cambridge. And the idea that they were saying no, time isn't really even a thing. It's just how we conventionally track the passing of moments. Others have said this before, but the Cambridge group, as a group of Christian theists, were trying to work on this. And Craig's view has always been, well, wait a minute, rather no, there is some metaphysical reality that we're tracking. So like when we came up with a segment of time that we call the second, and that we call the minute, and that we call the hour. Right. We came up with that. That's conventional, but we are measuring a length of something that actually exists. Okay. That is, I take it to be Craig's view. Maybe I'm wrong on that. And you can fix me on that.
I'll tell you this. A fun story too. In that first class, there was about 50 of us, and you can imagine me, I'd been studying Craig's work. He was like a rock star to me. And I was like, now I finally get to meet him and actually take his class. And so all of the students, all this 50 of us were in his classroom, and then he finally walks in, and I was like, oh man, it's Dr. William Lane Craig. And we all had to do a quick introduction. He wanted to hear us all say our names and where we were from, and I think our favorite hobby or something like that. Well, about a half hour into the conversation, he's teaching about time, and I'll never forget my first question. I raised my hand and I said, well, what is a moment? And he goes, oh, but here's what I'll never forget it. When I raised my hand, scared to ask that question, and he's like, yes, Tim, you have a question? And I was like, he knows my name. How did he know my name? I just introduced myself once, and a half hour later he calls me by name. But that was the question I asked. And I think you're right. We're measuring this something that is going on. But, I just like to describe it as things happening one after another,
Now this is all leading up to something, so I don't mean to cut you off, but I was leading up to a question for you.
Okay.
So if we're measuring something that is real, that's helpful, because then we want to know, in the timeless state, was that something that's real there or not? Because as you know, if that's something that's real is there in the timeless, what we have classically called the timeless state, for God, it's just that nothing's happening, which is what I took this eternal moment. Yeah, nothing's happening. Nothing's God exists, right? God exists, but statically. Now, some people would want to say, well, hold on a second. That means God can't think, because thinking would require a progression of moments. But you're probably about to say the same thing as me. An omniscient God doesn't need to think like we do, because we have to put ideas together to come to new conclusions. And our thinking is actually a process of learning. But if God knows all things, he doesn't have to think through a series of thoughts like we do. He just statically knows everything. Now, here's my question. Mm-hmm. So if God is in that state, you have either timelessly or with an eternal moment of time. Now, we both agree that as long as there's no passing of moments, you don't have a problem of like a past infinite series of, events. We don't have a past infinite series of events, but we would still have a past infinite history of what we could call moments. And maybe you would want to say that is a potential infinite.
I wouldn't say that.
Okay. Go on.
I mean, I would say,
because my question is, why do we need that temporal eternal moment that is static? Why can't we just have no time?
Well, it depends on how one is just thinking about time. I mean, I normally say God is timeless sans creation. Now, what I am, so I agree with Dr. Craig, and I think that's a helpful way to phrase it. But then some who say, well, okay, if time is an attribute of God, which I'm not committed to, well, okay, if that's what you're saying, then we have to say that the quality of what, the way time, just say the quality of time changes, then it changes with the first change. So I would say
I don't mean to break your flow, Tim, but we got one Cameron Bertuzzi in the chat.
Good to see Cameron. What's up, brother?
Go ahead.
I would call it a static state. If we're going to say that time existed prior to creation, then it's a static moment of time, the way people think of the B theory of time. But there's just no physical block universe. It's just the triune God. in his, I sometimes call it in his static state of aseity. Okay, well, fine, we can call that static time if you want to. We don't have to, but God creates, and dynamic time comes into existence now, and so static God is dead. That's funny. But yeah, so that's how I would say it. But if it's a static state prior to dynamic time, then we can't say there's infinite moments. There would just be the static moment. That's the way it seems to me. Maybe you see it differently.
Well, I'm not familiar with that idea. It seems like if there was a static moment, that moment, how long is that moment?
Well,
is that moment as long as it can be?
No. That's such a good question. And I think
that's why I
asked
it. I'm known for asking good questions.
You do. And I asked that same question to Dr. Craig in that first classroom and experience with him. And he said the question is incoherent. I believe, this long time ago, this 2012. If memory serves, I think he said something to the effect that the question itself is incoherent. Or I think it was, why did God wait so long before he created? And he said that question is incoherent. You can also ask, well, why did he create so quickly? There was no length of dynamic time there. It's really this abstract. It's hard to conceive of. I can conceive of it now, but it takes work.
And I'm fine with that, because on the one hand, Tim, like you and I are probably used to telling people, I know I am, that, can you imagine a state of timeless nothingness? I can't, because I've never experienced a state like that. There's always going to be things that we have a difficult time connecting to when we're talking about sans the physical universe. But what I hear you saying is, okay, now look, this is why these pieces matter to me. So help me out. So time. So like when I say the atomic clock, all right, that's clocking time right now, we as a convention came up with seconds, minutes, hours, right?
Yeah.
But the second does intuitively seem to be, and experientially seem to be, tracking something shorter than minutes and hours.
Yeah.
All right. And a minute seems shorter or longer than a second, but shorter than an hour. Okay. So that's on the view that this time is actually some sort of physical reality. Okay. Some metaphysical thing now, or metaphysical. But here's the question then. Are you saying that on your view in this eternal static existence, that there is a real existent thing called time, or is that just a way we refer to the passing of moments?
Yeah. So I'm going to say one is free to define his terms. And so if we can say that there is no time in this, with God sans creation, or you can just say there is no dynamic time. And so with God's static state, it is a weird kind of moment. It's a different kind of moment than what we have, where things don't happen and where things don't change. But obviously we exist in a state where things change, where things evolve, where things happen. Foitini Markopoulou, a great physicist from Greece, once said, apart from time, and she's talking about dynamic time, she says, apart from time, things don't happen. Now, this gets us into Kalam stuff here, because and with the argument I just gave, I say, yeah, she's exactly right. Apart from time, things don't happen, unless what exists apart from time is a personal agent with libertarian freedom who can choose to make something happen. But if there's not a libertarian agent existing in that eternal stat, or within that static state, then nothing will ever happen to cause a universe to come into existence, because apart from time, things don't happen, unless it's a personal agent with free will who can make a choice, an active choice to make something happen. And so again, this is why I think that time is evidence for God's existence. Okay, now maybe did I answer your question? I mean, you go ahead.
I don't know. Honestly, in this domain, I'm open on this. Like if you said to me, Tim, like, okay, look, there is this time of sorts that God inhabits. Of course, that is one of the views available that we hear about. But here's my concern with it. Okay. And maybe in talking through it, I'll realize I don't have a concern. But so if you've got a temporal moment, it's not about how long or short it is because nothing's happening in it. And you've got this temporal moment. Okay. Like, was there a beginning to that temporal moment? Like it seems like, yeah. Is there a beginning to that temporal moment?
Yeah. There was a,
is it the beginning? Like, because God simply exists, sans the physical universe. So when does that moment begin?
Simultaneous with the first change. So as soon as there's a change of any.
Well, yeah. That's the moment that creation begins, right? The second moment.
Well, as Dr. Craig has said before, suppose for the sake of argument, that that the second person of the Trinity counted down 3, 2, 1, let there be, bam, and the universe came into existence. Well, the time then would have started prior and before the Big Bang because there was changes.
Because there was that 3, 2, 1.
3, 2, 1.
Yeah,
boom.
It would begin right then.
Yeah,
right?
And let's say if the prior to sans creation, the Holy Spirit, the third person of the Trinity said to the first person of the Trinity, how are you doing? And, said that in some, I don't know, other language, English, it doesn't matter, but said, how are you doing? Well, time then, a dynamic time. You can't utter a sentence with a first word, middle word, and final word without things happening. And so time then would have started without the space-time universe. So I think a lot of times we conflate the space-time universe with change of anything. So if God, the triune God, never acted, or suppose he's in a static state and then creates some immaterial realm that doesn't include space. Well, he still created time, even though he didn't create the space-time.
Yeah. I don't have a problem with the idea of time existing sans the physical universe. I'm saying, like, I'm with you when you say, like, okay, if one person in the Trinity said to the other, okay, 3, 2, 1, that it would start with 3, or whatever the first change was. Okay.
Yeah.
But that's the change. That is the time related to the beginning of the universe. I realize it's just before and then after the beginning of the universe, but the time that God inhabits this, like, even if he never created the universe, this temporal moment that you say,
it's not a temporal moment. It's a static moment.
It's a static, timeless moment.
It's a static, non-dynamic moment. So we experience dynamic moments. And so I'm saying there's no dynamic time, no dynamic moments. If we're going to assume the Big Bang,
what do you mean by dynamic? Changing, right?
Yeah.
Like the 3, 2, 1. But logically prior to that, you had a static existence. And I think the only difference is between what you're saying and what I'm saying is maybe you're agreeing with Ryan Mullins that it's like a part of God's nature or something.
I'm not affirming, but I'm open to the possibility.
I'm open to the possibility of that. But why is okay? So why can we not just say without time? Because it would be a static existence without time. And I think that's what Craig says, isn't it? That it's just a without.
Yeah, that's normally I'm just saying that. That's normally the way I speak in a timeless state. But then if somebody wants to say, well, wait, that is still a kind of time. Or if they say, well, that's what's the other kind of time that you said, Johnathan, that you said, Dr. Bloom?
Meta.
Meta time. Okay, I say, well, what do you mean by meta time? Do things happen? Do things change in this meta time? If so, then it's dynamic time. If not, then if you're still going to call it time, it's a static state, a static time, where things aren't happening, things aren't changing. But I typically think of time as a way to measure change. And And there was a first change, as my argument showed. There has to be a first change because we can't have changes that go and, we're going to hit that infinite regress problem. And I just, I say that God freely chose to initiate the first change, the first dynamic moment. And that explains why we are experiencing dynamic change and things changing over time and evolution now.
Well, let's just
I'm more inclined towards the metatime view myself, because a friend of mine, Dr. Chad Meeks, he's pastor at Cedar Heights Baptist Church, smart guy. He once wrote, trying to contend that timelessness was a great making property for God, and I guess I haven't even figured out what we think time is yet, so I don't know how it could be a great making thing, or if timelessness is even a thing at this point, because I don't know. It seems to me there's something to the presentist argument that it's never not now, and any experiencer is not ever not experiencing the present. So I know that's a lot of double negatives, but to me that just seems to make the most sense, and I don't know why. For example, I think it was Justin Peters who said that William Lane Craig's comment was undiluted heresy. I don't know what he said that was heresy, but then maybe they didn't like the word learn, that God learned something.
Open theism is heresy to many people.
Well, it's not, but I don't think
it's just wrong.
Not to me either.
I don't think that William Lane Craig meant learn as in God didn't know it would be, he would study again. God didn't know.
He didn't gain new propositional knowledge.
Right. He knew he God's knowledge was complete in the sense that he knew that Bill Craig would eat lunch and then would resume study. Those were all propositional truths that he had, but he did not. He learned, I guess, the difference in the tenses of he is eating lunch now. He is no longer eating lunch.
Mm-hmm.
That I don't. But when he says learn, I don't think that he meant that God is gaining new knowledge.
Right. That's not.
He already knew that Bill Craig would finish lunch. So,
and he knew exactly what he would eat for lunch.
Right. So it's not that he was learning in the sense of he had no inkling of anything ahead of the present when he
not even just that he had no inkling. He knew exactly what would happen. It's just that the indicators changed.
Yeah.
It's just like the indicators changed when he was moving through time. Now it's this. Now it's this. Now it's this. Now it's this.
Now, like it will be X. It is now X, and it was X, but it's not. But X changes. That propositional knowledge is X.
Yeah, I would, instead of said learn, I would have said, like, going back to the experiential propositional distinction. I would say not that he learned that the truth changed, but his awareness has changed.
Okay, now
because he is aware that it is 1240. Now he's aware that it's no longer 1240. He's aware. He always knew that it was. He always knew that when it is, and he knew that it won't be after the moment passes.
So it's not like the kind of learning where it's like, oh, what do you know? It's now 1241. I didn't see that coming.
Right.
Yeah, he's not surprised.
His awareness of the facts changed. So I'll cut Bill Craig some slack, but I don't understand the hubbub about any view of time that anyone takes with respect to God, because I know that most science now leans towards B theory, like in physics and all of that. But I still think when I hear them talk about it, to me, that's a crapshoot. It sounds like the two of y'all. It seems like anybody and everybody is just spitballing this stuff. At least to me.
Well, real quick. Kyle Kringle said, here's like somebody who might have an issue with a idea about time. Static God is dead. God describes himself as deliberating, which is thinking. This should not be controversial. So first of all, I wanted to put this up because Kyle mentioned that, Pritchett, you put this up a minute ago, and he said, well, why didn't y'all comment on it? I see none of my stuff's going to be responded to. Well, we are benevolent podcasters here. I want to make sure that you're happy, Kyle, as a user.
In my defense,
secondly,
I put comments up all the time.
Yeah.
Just to throw them out there. There's no guarantee that they're going to stop having in the middle of their conversation. I'm the one that's doing that. So just to be clear, I mean, they won't even stop to let me say much today. So.
That's right. That's right. But what I want to say about this is, let's look at the second part of your statement. God describes himself as deliberating, which is thinking. This should not be controversial. Now that's worth discussion.
Yeah, it is.
Static God is dead. I don't know that that's worth discussion unless you've got something to support that claim. And I'm not saying that rudely, but why is it
I
not?
agree. Static God is static God does not exist. I would say that.
Yeah.
And so if we want to say that's what static God is dead,
but you were saying that
I disagree
in a static state.
What?
In timelessness, God exists in a static sense of timelessness, but that doesn't mean God himself is static. Is that what you're trying to say?
No, I would say that, well, God is.
You use the word static.
Yeah, no, I did. God is not static, or God is static sans creation. If creation,
that's
was
my view. That's our view. Yeah.
Yeah. So God. So I would say God was static and is no longer static.
Right.
He's doing things. He started doing things. There was a first action, a first divine action, because we can't have an infinite regress. And so if there was a first divine action, now God is in this. God existed in a state of where he never changed anything or caused anything to happen. And then he did. And so now things are different forever, because like I said earlier, God can't erase and then create again for the first time. So it's logically impossible for him to be static. He could stop doing, he could erase everything and stop doing anything, but it would always be true that he did something.
See, so, this is why I'm sympathetic to Kyle's statement, static God is dead. He followed that up with another comment where he's saying the fact is that God is the opposite of that, because he was trying to demonstrate it. Yeah. And no, it wasn't a joke. A static God is immutable. Yeah, I reject immutability too. Like the idols, God was proving himself better than. This is why I'm sympathetic to the idea of a meta time that John Bloom floated, if not just the idea of getting rid of this timelessness stuff.
Well, what do you mean by meta time? What's the meta doing there?
Well, just time being a property of God's being. So I guess that's a little bit closer to.
Well, do you mean that, or do you just mean?
Because I don't like because I kind of have that same reaction that he might be having, Tim, when you say sans creation and timelessness, God is static. And I'm like, if so, that movement that y'all were discussing earlier to the first act, to me, it just seems like a meta time that was just a property of God's being or nature or whatever. It just seems like moving from that to creation seems to be, and it seems to track with the biblical language of from everlasting to everlasting. I don't think
that's going to be a problem. I think ultimately, let's think about the law of excluded middle. Things happen and change, or they don't. Right? Either the proposition things change, things are happening, or things are changing. Either that proposition is true or its negation is true. And so I don't care if anybody says meta or hyper or whatever, I'm like, what does it mean? Are things changing in that state or not? And as soon as somebody says, well, yeah, if I'm going to say meta and then things are happening one after another in this meta state, well, that's dynamic time by definition. And now you can't have an infinite regress. If you believe, as I do, that it's logically impossible to have an infinite regress, then we are left with what the Kalam gives us. And that is a static, that there is a state sans creation that is static, where things are not happening. Now, in my book, in that chapter 16, I talk about how God can deliberate. So was it Kyle? He said, I agree with him that the static God is dead. I disagree with the second part. God can deliberate instantaneously. An omniscient God deliberates instantaneously apart from dynamic time, and we ought not anthropomorphize him. But if God is truly omniscient, he can deliberate. He does deliberate instantaneously apart from time, all at once, so to speak. And that's why theologians and philosophers refer to these logical moments of time, not to be conflated or confused with chronological moments of time.
Logical priority and all of that.
Yeah,
I think most people grasp that, but yeah. Bilbo Baggins says I wouldn't call it meta time, non-metric time. I'm just using the language that our professor at Biola had used. But whether you call it meta time, non-metric time, or dynamic time, it seems like, Tim, though, when theologians talk like this, I think the pushback from like the people who just read scripture and talking about not anthropomorphizing God, is either it's all anthropomorphic or some of it, or to various degrees.
Depends on the genre.
Yeah, depends on the genre. But God is fine with anthropomorphizing himself in his own words. So is it really a problem if
it's a problem if we say, oh, God, for God to come to gain a knowledge, propositional knowledge, he's got to think things through over time.
Discursive knowledge, that's
right. He doesn't infer truth over time like humans do.
Right,
if one says, oh, well, if God is going to think things through to reach a conclusion, he's got to do. I talk about this exact thing in this. That means he's got to be doing this over, from time T1 to T2, T3, T4, and eventually he reaches a conclusion.
He learns.
He learns. We can't.
Well, that's
no,
I'm
going to reject that. Yeah. So I'm going to say
Craig word that I think got him in a lot of trouble. So
and for people that are freaking
that's
out,
what two different subjects here. God's deliberation does not need to be this drawn out affair, is what Tim's saying. It's this. He knows he doesn't have to learn, but the idea that he would have to think things through to know what he should do is a model where he does learn, and learns propositional truth.
Right.
But what we're saying about what Craig was saying in the video is that Craig does not have God learning any propositional truth. All he has is God learning, quote unquote. I wouldn't even use that term. I don't know why he used that term, but like now it's this time versus like I knew it was going to be 1249. Now I know that it is 1249.
Yeah.
And in a minute, I'll know that it was 1249. I don't think of that as learning at all, but I do know enough about how Craig talks to understand the language he's using.
Yeah.
Mullins once told me that it's not that God, I think it was Mullins that told me this, that God knows all relevant truths, and to say, oh, I know that you will freely choose to do X. Oh, now I know that you are freely choosing to do X. And now I know that you did freely choose to do X. Okay, there's no relevant change there. But God can he simply knows what time it is in the central time zone and knows that it's now 12:50 p.m. central time zone. But that doesn't, but he knew it was coming. He's not surprised by this. So I see where Dr. Craig's wording, using the word learning, is tripping people up, but just try to understand him. He's the man when it comes to God and time. In fact, he wrote a book called God and Time. He's written 2 big books on it. One for the academic literature. I think he said he spent 13 years studying God and time. And so this is some of the first stuff I learned from Dr. Craig years ago. And for people to be acting so surprised by his statements now show that they haven't really been paying attention.
Yeah. And someone's asking, how do you go from a static state to a dynamic state? Or others have asked, what is it like to move from static to dynamic? And I like Craig's analogy that he gives for this. He says, imagine a man seated for a really long period of time with no movement whatsoever, no discernible movement whatsoever. And then he stands up. He goes to stand up.
Yeah.
The moment that his muscles move to stand, if you hit a stopwatch, that would be like the beginning of time. It's going from a static state to, now here's the thing. There are different kinds of causes. There are state event causes where you throw a baseball through a glass window. Event causes where you throw a baseball through a window. The ball being thrown is what breaks the glass. That's an event that led to another event. There is state causation where you have a log resting on a frozen pond, and the frozen pond is nothing's happening, but the frozen pond is supporting and therefore causing the log to sustain where it's at. And then there is state event causation, or no, I'm sorry, there's agent causation, where you have a person going from a state in this sense of timeless nothingness, like a state of static situation, to standing and acting, and that would be your moment of going. That's a sort of a thing that I think can only be explained. It's the reason that Tim and myself and Andrew Loke and Craig and I think JP Moreland all say that free will is the best explanation, because if you have a state of timeless nothingness or static nothingness, then what can lead to something happening? Well, it's not going to be something deterministic, because there's no time for a chain of causes to impact each other to lead to the creation of the universe. Well, what about something random? Well, again, there's no time for random things to be happening to lead to the beginning of the universe. But if you have a timeless state event causation, where you're in a timeless state, and then you suddenly have an action or an event, that can only be explained by a certain kind of cause. If you don't have determinism or randomness, you have a libertarian free choice. And that's why the best explanation for the beginning of the universe is a libertarianly free choice. And that's why Calvinists that don't want to say, at the very least, God has libertarian free will of some sort, they need to explain to me then how the universe got started, because there was no deterministic chain that led to God making that determination. So he at least has source libertarianism. Right?
Yeah, you're right.
I'm just looking at our professional wrestler friend still.
Yeah, what's Stillman saying here?
Apologist says, saying static to dynamic is just misunderstanding only having one state as a reference point versus multiple states to measure against each other. I think that's right when we're talking about in terms of the instance of divine timelessness to that first moment of creation, that T1, because you can reference all other events on the timeline, but trying to describe what timelessness is like when you have nothing to compare it with. See, that's where a lot of people get tripped up on and admittedly, I do too. I get tripped up on a lot of the discussions about time, regardless of theory. I understand them conceptually, but then when you start to really dig into it and try to work it out, and then you try to, how do we marry the ideas that we want to have from classical theism, what we think are maximal properties, what maximizes greatness in terms of talking about God plus biblical data, it can get confusing. And I think that's some of the things that perhaps Kyle was tripping up on, because admittedly I do too, because I'm more sympathetic to these ideas of whatever non-metric dynamic or meta time or whatever with God, because it's easier to think. But I do share Tim's concern that you had spoke earlier when you said God having to run through things to form a conclusion through his contents of knowledge, rather than it just having instant access to all knowledge simultaneously. So I understand wanting to balance all of those concerns, but I think Stellman's right that when you're talking about God sans the cosmos, it does get complicated because you have nothing to compare it to. Compared to
what's he saying is the misunderstanding.
When you're trying to describe God sans I think what he was saying was when you try to describe God sans the cosmos, you have nothing for which to compare. Whereas if you're talking about dynamic, you can compare this moment to the next moment to the previous moment to all that. It's easier to understand dynamism when you have other instances along the timeline to compare it to, versus talking about God. And then y'all touched on this earlier. Braxton went into this and you guys dialogued. I think the greatest confusion is that countdown to T1, that what happens there moving from timelessness to time and the cosmos is just that change there is hard for people to.
Well, and that's why I'm going to disagree with Stellman here if I'm understanding him, and where he says it's a misunderstanding. Like, no, static simply refers to the state where nothing has happened. And dynamic refers to the moment something, or the first instance of change, and everything since. So I don't see why my friend Stellman is saying it's a misunderstanding.
Okay. Bilbo Baggins said he has to go to work, so he'd love it if we get to a super chat. Thank you for the super chat, Bilbo.
Thank you.
Thoughts on the idea that God suffers, even if just on a small scale, like the slightest angst of making a choice. This would resolve a problem of suffering if it is logically necessary for existence.
Well, I don't affirm impassibility, so I don't know about the idea. If you want to talk about like suffers pain, Christ on the cross, sure. As far as God suffering, does God ever express disappointment in the Bible? It's all over the place. So I don't affirm the ideas of like impassibility.
Yeah,
I don't either.
But it's like suffer in terms of like anything comparable to like emotional state. I believe that God has emotional states, but I do not think that they alter his being in such a way that they affect us.
It doesn't make him irrational, that's for sure.
Well, not just that, but it doesn't have, I mean, he's not embodied, so it's not that God's emotional anguish or disappointment or displeasure or anything affects his self, in the way that
I agree with all that. Isn't it great how we the three of us here, agree on so many nuanced things? It's hard. I mean, it's great that we can all three be right and be together on a stream, right?
Well, none of us can fairly say that we're not completely on board with classical theism, because if you reject immutability, and if you reject,
that's right, I agree again.
Yeah, if you reject impassibility and you reject B theory, because B theory is typically associated, because the idea on B theory is that God is transcendent of time, but can also act in time. Which, if B theory is true, then Jesus is still on the cross,
that's one of the problems with B theory. Just might as well, because we did do a little primer on A and B theory. Should be said that there's a couple of problems people see with B theory. Tim actually has some interesting other ones I heard on a podcast once about evolution and all kinds of other things. But let me just throw you a couple of really simple ones. One is you result in a situation where you are both saved and lost at the same time as a Christian, because the previous you still actually exists, just like the current you actually exists, and the previous you isn't saved. In fact, there's a potentially infinite number of yous stretching back to your birth, different yous at various moments. Splices of you. So that becomes a problem. You become a time worm, and part of that worm is saved and part of that worm is lost. Or if you want to say they're different, each individual slice is a different person, then an infinite half of you is lost and an infinite half of you is saved or something.
Yeah.
Okay. So that would be one problem. And then what were you going to say, Tim?
Well, finish your thought, but I want to talk about how we should understand this B theory here pretty soon. So go ahead.
Yeah. And then another problem with it becomes you infinitely have Jesus actually on the cross, as Johnathan said, because that moment in the early first century when Jesus was hanging on the cross is still actually real. It's just like now is real. It's still real. And that seems counterintuitive and unacceptable.
So I think it is unacceptable. And I think there's even more problems for the atheist who affirms B theory, which like you mentioned, a lot of scientists are doing right now. But so for the atheist who affirms B theory and also affirms that evolution explains why we look intelligently designed, that's going to be a big problem. In fact, I first raised this to Dr. Craig, and Dr. Craig talked about it on his podcast afterwards. But it does, if you're, let's talk about the single-celled common ancestor. If that exists on one part of the frozen block, like a frozen, think about a fish tank with all these worms in it, and then you freeze this fish tank, this aquarium. It's so frozen that atoms aren't even moving, right? It's absolute zero. And so nothing's happening. And so on one side of the aquarium, you've got the single-celled common ancestor. And on the other side of the aquarium, you have human beings and all these other animal life forms. And so you got this tree of evolution. Well, look, the humans and apes and other dolphins and whales, everything is just as old or ageless as the single-celled common ancestor. You know, you just exist on a different part of the block, of the frozen block. And so you didn't really evolve. There wasn't really natural selection that got you to this place. You just
the storyboard was already out there.
And in fact, there's nothing really happening. There's just, you're looking at one part of the aquarium, the frozen block, compared to the other part.
Yeah.
And what most atheist theorists will say is that the block is just as eternal and timeless as we say God is. And so they've got something else that never came into existence. It just always exists. And that means you are eternal. Your slice and that part of the block is just as eternal and timeless as you say God can't be, but you are. but
I get that. And why can't I experience it if it was true? Why can't I experience not just travel back in time, but re-experience that moment if it is real? How come it is so contrary to our actual experience?
So that makes you, so now you're a frozen worm that's extended throughout this frozen block. And
is that what you want to be? A frozen worm on a frozen block?
You are on the B theory. And then but nothing is happening. That's why it's also called static time. Nothing is really happening. Like you said, Braxton, it's like looking at a mural. Nothing is really happening. It's just all there, frozen, never changes. And I'm not even really waving. It's just an experience. All these little slices of this worm make it feel like we're moving, almost like when those little cartoons where you have all those pictures on the pages. And it makes it look like it's moving, but the pictures aren't really moving.
Or imagine we're in the Smithsonian, Tim, and they're showing us a picture of some evolution of some animal, and you have like this tadpole, and then you have this bigger amphibious animal, and then you have this somewhat furry amphibious animal, and then you have this furry animal, and then you have this large furry animal, and then you have whatever the chain is supposed to be. Okay, and they put a spotlight, and we have this display in front of us, and they put a spotlight on the tadpole, and then they slowly move the light across the whole thing and say, now this turned into this, turned into this, turned into this. Well, you set up the whole display all at once. In fact, you may have started with the furry, completely evolved animal and worked your way backwards. But the fact is, this whole display was present from the jump. So if you're wanting to say that this display is representative, like a museum display would be, I get that. But what the B theorist is saying is more like the display itself, like the tadpole evolved into the amphibian, into the furry amphibian, into the furry, into the big thing. And it's like, no, it didn't. This display was all together as it was, with a spotlight moving across it. None of it evolved into each other.
Yeah, I think that's, and Dr. Craig actually agreed with me and put it on his podcast. He agrees that's a problem for evolution. Because the atheist holy grail, they need Darwinian evolution to explain the complexity of humanity today and how we got here. But on that view, we didn't get here. We've always been there, eternally and without beginning.
I like that. We've broken so much tradition here. I've got to get to these super chats.
Let's just do super chats and then we'll close it up.
Jim,
man,
Amber,
you gotta have me on. I have a lot more to say.
I just want to briefly pause to make sure that we cover this, and then we'll get to a few questions. Jim Amberg, $20. He is our channel angel. We are so thankful for Jim supporting the channel. Derek PG Beeler has a question for $4.99. Thank you for the super chat. Derek, is God's creation of time proof he has libertarian free will? Because such a choice is necessarily self-determined and no external antecedent.
Yes, it is. Yeah. It is proof of libertarian freedom.
At least source libertarian. That's right.
Nothing determined him to do that. It was his choice.
Right, but it doesn't follow from that we necessarily have libertarian free will.
Yeah, there's
But
other arguments for that.
What it does show is that, yes, it is proof that God has it. So the people who argue that it is impossible for God to have it,
or it's impossible in principle,
right, are incorrect, because I agree that
Please put my wife on the screen.
Oh,
What?
Tia Stratton.
Your wife's on the screen?
Yeah. Time is a piece of wax.
You know,
what song is that from?
Tia,
that
that makes so much more sense than anything that Braxton and Tim has said all.
Wait, where did she get that, Tim? Where did she get that?
That's from a song. I'm a loser, baby.
Yes, I was make sure it's time is a piece of wax falling on a termite.
Wow.
Just choking on the splinters.
Okay. Kyle Kringle says, formal apology for my pettiness in the beginning. Never apologize. I am petty on purpose all the time. No need to apologize for that. I guess I'm still a cage stage open theist. Okay, but don't ever be cage stage anything, because the Calvinists are bad enough. I appreciate you, everything you cover, and I should be acting like I can still learn. No problem. You should have seen me 15 years ago. Nobody liked me. Not even 30 yet. I don't know squat. I probably knew more at 30 than I do at 48, or at least I thought I did. But yeah, I understand the sentiment. Yeah, we appreciate that, Kyle. And then Trinity Professor Greater Robert Geiler for
Robert
99 says, hi, guy. I haven't seen Robert he does his work.
It's so good to see Robert.
I haven't seen him on a stream in years, and here he comes through with a big super chat. Thank you so much, Robert. Maybe I have not given you enough work. I know I don't work Tim hard enough, I don't guess. And we have God, a pastor's thoughts. That's our friend Chris Harris, or my friend. I don't know if they like you, Chris. I do like.
I like Chris Harris.
Yeah, God qua God is impassible, omniscient, classically omnipotent, and so on. That's all.
If he's omnipotent, then he's not impassible. If God can do all things but doesn't do all things, then God can do one thing instead of another, and then do something else. And so, if impassible means never changes. Now, maybe I got Chris wrong here, but if it means that God can't change in relation to what so I agree that God doesn't change, in that he is always omniscient, always omnipotent, always omnibenevolent. So what do you guys think? Am I misunderstanding him there?
Well, impassibility, what he's saying is God is completely, and this is not his language, I'm caricaturing it. God is aloof and indifferent and unfazed by any sort of thing that anyone ever does. And everything that you read about God flaring his nostrils or getting angry is just anthropomorphic language, so that for our benefit, we know that activity that humans did was bad, but it's not that God's actually fazed by it, which I think.
Yeah, and I want to know what phased means.
Well, that's like I said, that's my language, because I really think impassibility is silly. but I mean, this is stuff that medieval theologians were just tossing out because you know, they sat in their ivory towers and forgot to read their scriptures, and then it just kind of stuck. All of this stuff, and because they have a random statement of, I the Lord do not change, I think that that's a metaphysical claim for anything and everything, including his emotional states, which
I think my good friend and colleague Josh Klein there has it right. Impassible can mean God's attributes don't change, not that God's actions don't change, or not that God can't do one action and then another action.
Yeah, I mean, Chris is saying impassible is to not be moved by emotions. Well, I disagree with that.
Yeah, I think we also anthropomorphize how we experience emotions, especially with think of what it means to still feel emotion, but to be omniscient and to know exactly, especially on my model, God creates the world. God creates the one feasible, freedom permitting world in which evil is ultimately defeated and everybody who's not transworld damned is saved. So God knows the best is coming without a doubt, but he can still experience, he can still see people he loves hurting and still feel for them. And he can still see when somebody is excited because they, hit the game-winning shot in the basketball game. He can still be excited for them because he loves them. But it's not the kind of emotions, I would call it the petty emotions that we have. But I still think God has emotions. I just think we have to be careful with how we think about it.
Well, moved or phased by them.
Yeah. I would say, yeah.
I don't know. God gets angry and then is moved by his own anger to inflict all kinds of stuff. Was there another? Yeah, there was more questions.
Two more questions.
Question for Tim.
Yes.
What is the purpose of God creating and establishing time in the first place?
So things can happen.
But God doesn't need things to happen. And so time, I say, is just at least dynamic time. All right. Dynamic time or things happening it just comes along for free when God creates. So God is timeless sans creation. God creates. Now the clock starts ticking. So his purpose wasn't, I don't think, to create time so things can happen. His purpose was to create humanity on purpose and for the specific purpose of love. And I would say that the universe in general, he created on purpose and for the specific purpose of love, which is really cool when you start thinking about the triune God. Love is more fundamental to reality than the physical universe, because you have the Trinity, given the namesake of our institution, our awesome institution. The Trinity exists in a timeless state, but in a perfect love relationship. And we can't, again, anthropomorphize and say, well, for a love relationship, you have to have dynamic time. No, you don't. Not with an omniscient God, you don't. It's eternal. It's just in a perfect state of eternal love, apart from dynamic time. God chooses to create humans in his image who can share in this love, so that when we, and this is what grounds objective morality, when we choose to act and correspond to reality, the fact of the matter that we were created on purpose and for the specific purpose to love, then we hit the mark. When we choose to go against that, we miss the mark. And that's what sin is. That's what evil is. The same power that allows us to love is the same power that, when we use in a backwards manner, is what brings evil into the world. That's easy to remember because love spelled backwards is evil. Not the best speller, but you'll never forget it. And but God created on purpose for the specific purpose to love. When he created, time comes along for free and just happens. So that's how I'd answer that.
All right. Well, it's been over an hour, almost coming up on an hour and 15 minutes. And I know that you gentlemen are either busy or you're not busy enough, in which case I will see to that.
I got to go grade some papers right now. So.
Right.
Well, we will. But
I've got plenty. But
well, real quick, Pritchett, before you start to close it down, I just want to say, for anyone else that's interested in this topic, some years ago, Matt Chisholm, formerly of the Bible Bro Down, I guess he's still part of the Bible Bro Down, but they haven't been active like they used to. He and I had a conversation that turned into a casual debate, and you can get that on our debates playlist by checking it out there. And it took place on Marco Polo, which, for those of you who don't know, is just a chatting software. So the way I have produced this for you is very strange, but I think it's a very helpful debate and covers a lot of the topics that we discussed.
Matt Chisholm is an open theist for all you cage stage open theists. All right, Tim, what do you got coming up on your channel? Anything good? Or is it just Josh? Which
only bad things.
Yeah. Hey, I'll just let me throw this out. Josh Klein, who we just talked about, my colleague, he just got a gig on the next Jubilee debate.
Nice.
So, yeah. So I think
really,
that's so cool.
I
hope it's cool that I told that to the world, Josh. But I know that Josh and I will be talking about this a lot. I think it's going to be on Christian nationalism stuff. If I remember correctly.
Excellent.
But Josh is great at that stuff, and I got to tell you, Josh is an up and comer, and he's working on his PhD right now as well. Fantastic theologian and philosopher, and I'm blessed to work with that.
Well, I mean, let's not oversell it.
I think he is. He's debated Randall Rouser a couple of times on this channel, and Tim once. And so I'm a big fan of Josh, and I'm glad that he was here today.
Yeah. Well, all right. Once again, I want to say that you should go to Trinity College of the Bible and Theological Seminary and check us out at trinitysem.edu. You can learn from all of us. You can learn from Dr. Flowers and Chris Featherstone and some other professors. And we highly encourage you to do that. If you want to support what we're doing at Trinity Radio, you can go to patreon.com/Trinity Radio. And if you would ever buy me coffee or Braxton coffee.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Sign up for $5 a month or whatever. Every little bit helps. And we appreciate that. So
Patreon.com/Trinity Radio.
And in closing, as Tim's better half reminds us of the great philosopher of time, Beck.
He's a Scientologist.
Is he really?
Time is like a piece of wax
falling
on a splinter,
or
on a termite,
choking on
the splinters. There you go, man. That's some old school.
I'm a loser, baby, so why don't you kill me?
Very uplifting
all day, brother. No, I'm just kidding. And with that, we'll see you next time on Trinity Radio, and go subscribe to Free Thinking Ministries.
That's right.
Go subscribe and follow him on Twitter
and Reasonable Faith updates.
Yeah, and all that stuff. And go defend William Lane Craig, defend his honor, and all that stuff. God bless you guys. Have a great weekend.
See you later.